express interest in being in a Marvel film?
Yes. In the past, yes.
Have you asked your Ghostbusters co-star, Paul Rudd, to put in a good word for you with the head of Marvel?
No.
Is that because MCU films have been mid recently?
Yes.
I never thought I would say this, but the MCU is in shambles.
The MCU probably won't exist in 5 years, and here's why.
Is it just me, or has Marvel fallen off?
He can put the ball on the floor. He can do turnarounds. He has one of the best footworks inside.
You have no idea how good
the MCU
was. Oh my God.
I can be delusional, but I also know when to face the music. And the MCU is looking kind of rough right now. I won't lie to you. Despite this, I don't think it and Marvel as a whole are cooked, but something's gotta change. Ideally, I didn't want to talk about anything at all until the end of Phase 5, but 2 industry-wide strikes and many executive decisions have made that way further out than what was expected before. So it's time for me to suit up again and address the MCU. Get cozy, grab some snacks, and let's start with Phase 5. I was rooting for this movie so badly. I loved He Who Remains and Loki, and our first project with Kang the Conqueror as the main villain was shaping up to start off Phase 5 with a bang. But this was not a banger.
And I know bangers.
It feels like there were so many opportunities for this movie to put itself out there and really start to cook up. But when those moments came, the lights were simply too bright. When the trailer showed Scott's ego being all inflated after his contributions in Endgame, I thought that was going to be more of a point of contention throughout the whole movie. But it ended up being more of a gag for like the first 30 minutes, and that was pretty much it. In general, it felt like they were shaping up a lot for Scott and backed out of it altogether. The gang being split up in the quantum realm was a really cool idea to me, especially after hearing about it so much in the past 2 movies. And despite trying my best to ignore the terrible CGI that was the quantum realm, it also didn't hit either. The group of rebels was one of the most unnecessary additions to anything I had seen in a while, and did nothing but bring this movie down more. When I rewatched this and saw William Jackson Harper again, I could really just say that this may be in the top 5 of wasted castings in the MCU. If I really had to boil down this movie, it felt like an undercooked, boneless Star Wars parody. And I even remember thinking that in the theater. Going back to the characters, I don't know if I liked how anyone was written in this movie. Scott was generally okay, but kind of muted. They genuinely seemed to forget about Hope at times, maybe because of Evangeline Lilly in real life. Hank was extremely underutilized, especially being written as the wacky guy with the ants. And Janet was pretty solid. It seemed more like she was the Wasp of this movie because of her connection to Kang and the quantum realm. And I can't really get through this without talking about the elephant in the room, right? Jonathan Majors was phenomenal as Kang, to the point where I said, Marvel really bagged their next big bad already, and I love it. Pretty much all of the highlights of this movie come from any of the scenes that he was in. I love the sequence where Janet's giving his backstory and caught a glimpse of who he really was. I love that he showed Scott that he will not hesitate when it comes to standing on business and getting things done. Everyone in this movie was talking about the guy like Wilt Chamberlain with his 100-point game. Majors just brought the kind of charisma you wanted out of someone known as the Conqueror and genuinely stole the show. But then he committed one of the most generational fumbles I've witnessed, and his real-life woes will be discussed later in this video. Quantumania isn't the kind of movie I would have opened up this phase with, especially coming off of Wakanda Forever. There was some good, but with how bad this movie could get, it doesn't really mean much in the end. Just imagine how cool it would have been for Disney to go all the way and kill off Scott. Or, if that's even too far, you could have actually left him in Hope stuck in the quantum realm, which I, and many other people, thought was going to happen. But instead, he goes back home and has a very strangely placed existential crisis, which again had me thinking something was going to happen right before the movie ended. But nope, nothing. I'd also like to award this one the most poorly aged post-credit scene of all time award, because all in all, I'd honestly give Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania a 4 out of 10. In as polar of an opposite you could get flip side, I love this movie so much. I got to see it at an early screening, and I even got this very cool poster. I've loved the Guardians movies since the beginning, and begged to see the first one for my birthday back in 2014. James Gunn managed to whip up something magical with a group I had not heard of before, aside from being in LEGO Marvel superheroes. The way that the finality of this movie was being promoted, in addition to how everyone involved was talking about it, had me fearing for some of the worst devastation I would feel in my life. And I'll admit, I almost cried within the first 20 minutes. seeing one of those Baby Rocket flashbacks. In a stark contrast to Quantumania, I think I loved how everybody was written in this one. The Guardians were kinda in a weird spot because of some pretty considerable developments with the team that happened in a 2-part Universal crossover, but somehow, just a small bit, I think someone could follow pretty well by just watching the trilogy on its own, and I think that's a nice achievement in itself. There's a kind of energy that the whole movie gives off that just makes me feel good, but there's a little sadness sprinkled in because it's a finale after all. If you told me I would have been brought as close to tears as I was because of a CGI raccoon and an otter a year before this movie came out, I might have believed you. I can't lie. Shokugeki Iwuji as the High Evolutionary is easily top 10 villains in the MCU, and he makes you hate him effortlessly from the very start. Will Poulter as Adam Warlock could be terrifying, but also hilarious. If I really try nitpicking this movie, I'd say that one of the very minuscule issues I had with it was the amount of pump fake deaths that we got. After the first 2 or so, I was just like, okay, I don't think anyone's gonna die. But I will say, Lila telling Rocket it wasn't his time yet had me geeked in the theater. This movie just solidified that James Gunn knows what he's doing when it comes to making comic book movies, even though there's an army of people who absolutely hate him. I'm excited for what he can do with the whole universe in his hands, and for his last ride in the MCU, he didn't disappoint. I'm giving Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 a 9 out of 10. And just like that, it was as if Marvel flew too close to the sun. The actual comic book Secret Invasion event is one of my favorite things ever. And the arc in Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes went so hard for no reason. And you know, when the show got announced along with everything else at Comic-Con in 2022, I decided to read the actual comics for the first time, so I really knew what was up. A series that sounded like some elite espionage, centering around Nick Fury dealing with Skrulls on Earth that could have potential reverberating effects all over the MCU, sounded peak. It sounded like exactly what the MCU needed. I was way too ready for it. I just wanted it instant. This show was an embarrassment and one of the worst things I've watched ever. If you are a normal viewer on this channel, I've sent subs to this show multiple times, like its name was Aubrey and I was a rapper from Compton, okay? The first 2 episodes were good. You could possibly throw the 3rd one in there if you'd like to. Full transparency, by the way, I don't have it in me to rewatch this show. I just have too much respect for myself. So don't expect the most detail as I go over these episodes based on memory. Like nearly every single Disney Plus show, all of the storytelling falls apart around the midpoint. Gravik and his whole Skrull faction were supremely underwhelming to me and weren't really compelling at all. His whole grudge with Nick and wanting to take over the Earth for the Skrulls was something that made me go, okay, I'm listening. Yeah, Nick should have been held accountable for doing the Skrulls dirty, but that being the main driving force for the invasion, kinda insane. I also just realized very quickly that you can't get anywhere near the weight of the comic event without having multiple Avengers in this project. This should have been a movie. You can't condense a moment like this into a 6-episode series, and on top of that, definitely can't do it with this kind of execution. I am a stickler for the Fantastic Four, if that wasn't clear already. This video right here, please watch it. I had a lot of fun making it. The audio is a little scuffed, but you gotta start somewhere, right? We'll talk more about them later, don't worry. So seeing that they would be going for a Super Skrull storyline when not a single crumb of the Fantastic Four has been seen in the MCU aside from this sneaker right here in the credits of She-Hulk, I'm not crazy. You can imagine how close I was to crashing out. This fact being accompanied by a CGI slugfest of a fight that I thought this show would avoid but somehow still managed to fit in genuinely had me on the verge of psychosis. The idea of the Harvest is one of the most idiotic things I could think of, and I thought it was a joke to trick Gravik into doing something, but it is genuinely a vial with a whole bunch of DNA from a whole bunch of different people and monsters in the MCU. I can't believe this was the series that we got. I expected so much more out of it and some pretty big reveals, but instead we found out that the single Avenger who shows up in the show was a Skrull the whole time. I don't know what might have gotten cut out because of the pandemic or reshoots or simply changing their minds, but the vision they had for this show couldn't have been this, because this end product, no bueno whatsoever. I didn't even talk about the AI intro. AI has to be one of the cheapest things ever when it comes to art. I hate it. I think I'm gonna talk about it to some extent in a video, but it's just not good. It's so soulless. I don't see any good in it. But aside from that point, I just get mad anytime I think about this show, and I don't want to talk about it anymore. Secret Invasion gets a 2 out of 10 for the amount of episodes it was good for. There's no better feeling than one of your takes aging well, so I'm just gonna let you read this comment right here. Yes, I did say that Loki was the best Disney Plus show, and undoubtedly that is still the case. It sounds kind of dumb out loud, but this was more of a season 1B than a season 2, but that's not a bad thing at all. The season kicks off immediately where we left off at season 1's finale, and you were really just asking yourself how Loki could possibly undo any of what happened. The reason why I love this show so much boils down to Tom Hiddleston and the fact that you can really tell he cares about Loki and his character arc starting from the very beginning. Pretty much all of what I said about season 1 back in my first video applies to this one too. I really love this cast, and in this season specifically, OB was a great addition. I never figured someone like Owen Wilson would join the MCU, but him as Mobius is probably one of my favorite characters in the universe, and I started to genuinely care about him in this season especially. Once again, Jonathan Majors was really on one as Victor Timely and had a really great ability to make these Kang variants seem like different people. And I was very happy that they pulled back from all the self-cess stuff with Sylvie, but she wasn't too involved with this season, which is something I'm kind of okay with, but I do like Sylvie as a character. This show even had its own Infinity War moment where I thought it was all over. Episode 5 was probably my favorite, which showed how cool and complicated time travel is, and had another moment where I went, whoa, all over again. The finale was something else entirely, with such an immense weight to it. Things got to a point where I was kind of like, yeah, obviously everything is going to fall into Loki's hands, but to really see him step up, take on a new form, and go on to tether the multiverse and all its branches to fulfill his one true glorious purpose was amazing. A great and probably the greatest Disney Plus entry in its catalog, and I'm happy to hear that some of the people who worked on this one are going to be involved with Daredevil Born Again, if that's still true. I'm giving Loki season 2 an 8.5 out of 10. The most polarizing movie in the MCU ever, or at least you'd think so based on the initial reception of it. I feel so bad for this movie. It came out like a week or two after the SAG-AFTRA strike ended. They couldn't do much promo or a press tour, and it was a film simply headlined by 3 women, with 2 of them being women of color. My best friend and I briefly discussed the deadlock of the POC woman tax around its release. So based on those optics alone, I knew this movie would struggle. I did not like the first Captain Marvel. That was the first and only MCU movie to put me to sleep in the theater. No, it's not because it was a female-led movie. It was just boring. I never went back to finish the Ms. Marvel series, and if we're being honest here, Monica was shoehorned into WandaVision. Kinda crazy. More recently, I kinda hate how Phase 4 was pretty much all set up that won't fully pay off until years from now, but putting that aside, The Marvels was literally one of the middest movies of all time. You hear that? Not bad, not woke trash. It was just okay. The outrage that this movie cooked up from a certain group of people online killed me. If I hadn't seen it or simply didn't have the brain cells to think for myself, I would have thought this movie was Madam Web bad, but it wasn't. If I ever start pumping out content like this, you gotta put me down. Stab me, burn me, or find the real me, because that means I got cloned, and they got me. This was a fun trio. Kamala just being in awe of Monica and Carol, while the 2 of them have their own things to sort out, made for some funny moments, and some generally alright story beats. I like the exploration of abandonment issues with Monica, cause that's real. Dar-Ben was a horrible villain though. I bet you didn't even know her name, or forgot it. She was extremely forgettable and generic. I did enjoy that fight where they all jumped her though. That was some good stuff right there. The CGI was rough at times, which is more of an issue than not these days, and I'm kind of surprised when it is good. The ending was pretty neat too. It was ruined because of something that I'm going to talk about in a whole section later on in this video, but I still ended up liking it. And the post-credit scene was definitely a last-minute addition, but how am I not supposed to be happy seeing Hank McCoy looking like he jumped straight out of a comic book? It was definitely a Hail Mary to real viewers back in, but it worked on me. I can't lie. I don't know what they're planning exactly, but it brought me back a little bit. I'll give The Marvels a 5.5, 6-ish out of 10. It's nowhere near as bad as people made it out to be. And finally, we've got the latest project out of the MCU. I have pretty fond memories of Hawkeye. Thought it was a great project for the street level and for the parts that she was in. Maya Lopez seemed like a pretty rad character. Rad enough for a solo show? Hell no. But hey, I'm not in the writer's room. If I had a nickel for every time a female-led Disney Plus show included Daredevil in its promo to make people more interested in the project, I'd only have 2 nickels, but it's weird that it's happened twice. I did go in with as open of a mind as possible, and I think I liked it. I don't know for sure. I will say they were doing way too much talking about how dark and gritty this show would get, since it was rated mature, but brother, come on. This was no different than what we typically get in these shows, aside from one guy getting shot in the head, another in the chest, and maybe something else. But it was so few and far in between that I can't really remember. Watching the first episode, I really enjoyed the fight choreography, and it also made me remember a really small thing. I miss goons. No, not that kind, you weirdo.
Yes, bastard!
Henchmen, bro. We need those back in superhero media. Just show me two guys talking about Spider-Man before he comes in ready to pack them up. I did start cheesing when that boy Matt Murdock pulled up, and I might have left the show to rewatch Daredevil. Just maybe. The characters in this show were okay too. The overall narrative itself was interesting at times, but was it necessarily a great one? Not at all. But at this point, something really is better than nothing. I always love seeing Vincent D'Onofrio as Kingpin, and he was a good addition to the series. The part where Maya makes him relive his trauma made me laugh with the way it led to nothing. I might rewatch this one because I wasn't the most locked in when I was watching it, but I think it was a calm little show to set the tone of the Marvel Spotlight stuff. Echo gets a 5 out of 10 from me. And we got a little honorable mention segment here. When I started writing this, X-Men 97 wasn't out yet, but it is now, and it's so good. I decided to catch up because after episode 5 dropped, everyone was saying it's peak. They did not lie. Episode 5 was giving me chills multiple times throughout it, and I almost cried. I would catch the original occasionally growing up, but most of the time it would simply be a sign that I was up way too late. With this new series, it's animated beautifully, and it's just really vivid, something that I miss in superhero projects. Everyone looks so good and lively, and I just smile while watching it. It's emotional, has some real weight to it, and sometime around episode 2 I said to myself, this show really stands on its own 2 feet. It makes me very excited that we're slowly creeping up on the X-Men being on the big screen again, potentially even at their best if Marvel manages to cook anywhere remotely close to what they're doing with this series. I don't know why Bo DeMeo was fired. I'm not gonna be like rehire him because that's crazy, but I will say that him and this team he was a part of really made something special here. And with the release of this series, I realized that I never talked about What If in my first video, and it made me laugh a little bit. Season 1 was calm. I enjoyed the zombie episode a lot, and the Supreme Strange episode was peak fiction and included the kind of representation of his relationship with Christine that would have made Multiverse of Madness hit harder, but I digress. The announcement of the project caught me off guard, and I thought an animated anthology series like this would be good for a platform like Disney+, but then they decided to interweave everything, and I was just like, okay, I guess. I didn't bother watching season 2, but there was this one clip floating around when the finale dropped, and if I had a nickel for every time a female, super overpowered character showed up in a Disney Plus series, I would have 2 nickels. Basically, if X-Men 97 is the future of Marvel animation, great, and I will be there for Spider-Man 98 if we are blessed with such a creation. Please make it a thing. If someone on the street pulled up on me and asked me, how is the MCU doing right now? And I wanted to be nice, I would say they're about 3 for 6 on projects so far this phase. The aura of the MCU is fading rapidly. It's on its way to the ICU as we speak. As a result of those strikes I mentioned before, nearly every project that was intended to release this year got pushed back. But this kind of turned into a blessing in disguise because I think we were looking at over 10 projects between then and the end of this year, which would have been the epitome of doing too much. Instead, Kevin Feige and the gang at Marvel want to recalibrate and go all in on one project this year, and that is Deadpool 3, now known as Deadpool and Wolverine. This is looking like, and really has to be, the project that saves the MCU, and I will say it looks like a lot of fun. The first trailer came out for the Super Bowl, and it passed the eye test for me. It looks solid with a lot of fun mixed into it, and I think that's what the MCU needs right now to resuscitate it. Apparently on the inside, Marvel is so happy with the end product that they want Sean Levy taking care of more projects in the future. So I would take that as a good sign too. It's funny that it worked out this way because it got announced way back when I was in the middle of editing my first video, and I'm as excited for it now as I was back then. I have a special video that I plan on dropping around the time it's gonna release, if everything goes well. So just know that that's in the works. As for the rest of Phase 5, it feels extremely hit or miss, but I will get to it in a bit. This next topic's a little different. For the first time, maybe only, I'll be reviewing a video game on this channel. It's not gonna be crazy in depth or anything because I know this video is gonna be long enough as is. You're welcome, future me. Marvel Spider-Man 2 from Insomniac Games. Spider-Man PS4 was undeniably one of my favorite games of all time. It was one of the first games I begged my parents to pre-order, one of the first that I ever platinumed, and one of the first games that almost got tears out of me. To me, it was the perfect Spider-Man story, and the replayability it had was just admirable for a 15-year-old me, and even me now. I think I've beaten the main campaign 6 or 7 times just out of fun, and God knows how much time I spent swinging around and using photo mode. We don't have to talk about the DLC though. It wasn't that good. I expected more. I think like the first one with Black Cat was good, but all the Hammerhead stuff.
That ain't it, y'all.
And while the story of Miles' solo game did not hold up nearly as much for me, I love the upgrades to combat and the
exaggerated swagger of a black teen.
Knowing that a Spider-Man 2 was inevitable and had the potential of combining that beautiful storytelling of the first game with the additions and improvements to general gameplay from Miles' solo game, I thought this game would kill me. October 20th, 12 AM, I was there. I really enjoyed the ride. From the first loading screen, I was posted up like soups. I can't even lie to you.
This is the greatest.
And that was genuinely me after the first swing. I was so happy to be playing a Spider-Man game again with a new story and what felt like endless possibilities. The game's opening was great. A lot of this game was great actually, but there are some parts that made it come to a screeching halt. Most of those being toward the end, especially that final Miles suit. How could you look at that and say, yeah, this is it? Some of the aspects of this story do not hold anywhere near as much weight as some of what you could see in PS4. And that was primarily involving things surrounding Venom and the symbiote, which was depressing because the setup was incredible. And it was also sad to sit there after getting platinum and ask myself, did I really like this game? You know what else really sucks? No new game plus upon release and no foreseeable DLC. Sure, some seeds were planted like Carnage and Chameleon, but Insomniac left us undelivered for a few months. New Game Plus finally came out in March, very underwhelmed. Now you may be wondering, why did this man derail this video to talk about Spider-Man 2? Well, random viewer, I appreciate you for asking. I believe that Spider-Man 2 perfectly embodies some of the greatest issues affecting the MCU right now within its own video game microbiome. Some great highs, devastating lows, and mid throughout the experience. We also had some studio meddling that these corporations love to do. We've got spectacle in the sense that it's a Spider-Man game that looks stunning, but a story that is severely lacking at times and leaves you asking for more. Not saying any of this to call it an outright bad game, by the way. It's just the repetition of people putting projects out in a state where it steps on its own 2 feet and falls immediately. It's very draining. I hope Spider-Man 3 is really the product that Insomniac has in mind and that they have the time to get their vision out. And I really want this Norman Osborn to be one of the most compelling Green Goblin adaptations because up to this point, he's really just been lurking in the background. And speaking of Insomniac and their universe, another common thread here is leaks. Something Insomniac got body slammed by. I'm talking their whole future release slate getting put out, including what may be up ahead for Spider-Man like a solo Venom game or expansion, and some rough gameplay of their upcoming Wolverine game. It was definitely something to witness, like way too much. Hackers gave them the Hulk versus Thanos treatment. We live in an era now where people almost feel entitled to know every solitary detail about anything, and this effect has rampaged the MCU and movies in general, but comic book media especially. I remember growing up in the era where BTS photos coming out online would be insane to actually see for yourself, and it would only be 1 or 2 at that. Something like this would break the internet back then. But now full plot threads, cameos, all the surprises, the things that cultivate that theater experience and your very first viewing have just been tainted. I know at the end of the day it all goes back to money, but I don't want to know that Beast shows up in the Marvels before seeing the movie. And obviously the thing to do would be to unfollow these pages and stay away from the leakers, but with the way algorithms work, it's hard nowadays, man. Everybody has a voice, but that doesn't mean their voice should be heard by thousands, especially when these voices just want a few more dollars in their pocket. For the rest of Phase 5, we have some hits and we have some misses. There are shows like Agatha, which no one asked for, and Ironheart, which I completely forgot was going to be a thing. But I will tell you one show I am too ready for, and that is Daredevil Born Again. When the show got announced, it was like finding out the Avatar came back, but seeing that it actually went into production a couple months ago, it just hit home, man. I loved the original Netflix series so much. I remember watching it on Netflix back in the day when only season 1 was out. That whole Defender universe wasn't perfect, but it was a pretty significant moment, and I enjoyed it. The biggest hiccup for this show came from them restarting production because of them not liking the creative direction it was going in, which was kind of scary to hear because scrapping a whole show like that sounded insane, and I don't know how they messed up for such a big overhaul to happen, but I really don't want to. If that means we get Karen and Foggy back, Wilson Bethel as Bullseye, and John Byrne Bernthal as the Punisher, even though he was gonna be there. But just knowing he's there for sure, a win is a win. A win is a win. Season 3 was some of the best stuff I've ever seen when it comes to comic book media, and I'll take a true follow-up to it over some kind of loose sequel every time. I'm glad that Marvel's seeing how beloved these characters are, and I just hope they continue to implement them in the MCU in as many ways as they can and make sense. But then we got a project like Captain America Brave New World, which I feel extremely weird about. Falcon and the Winter Soldier wasn't amazing by any means, but I thought it was a good foundation for some kind of story revolving around Sam after he finally takes up the mantle. But the more news that comes out about this one, the worse it seems like it's going to be. There's some kind of Hulk subplot, which could be cool, depending on how it's executed. But at the same time, they've apparently had to do many reshoots for this movie because it's not testing too well. And I just find it kind of strange that once a black man dons the Captain America costume and holds that shield, Marvel forgets how to make movies all of a sudden.
You don't find that suspicious? You don't find that suspicious?
And like I mentioned in my first video, we still got Sabra in this movie. Marvel, I don't know why you want to die on this hill so badly. I promise you no one will miss her if you take her out. I promise you no one wanted her in the first place. It's just not a good look. And just based off the vibes of these two movies, I feel like it's going to lead into Thunderbolts. With this movie, there was one excruciating factor that took me from no interest at all to peak excitement to not being interested all over again. And that is Steven Yeun, one of my favorite actors. When I saw that he had been attached to this project, I thought it was a great surprise. Then it came out that he would be Sentry. I went crazy. A lot of people who didn't like this casting were a mixed batch of racists who think he should be Martin Lee because he is simply Asian.
You got some balls for a Chinaman. I'm Korean. Whatever.
And those who are not knowers of Ball. Me, I know Ball. I loved him as Glenn, and I talked about Invincible, which he is also great in. But what really cemented him being one of my favorites was the show Beef. An amazing show overall, but he was such a highlight. I felt like that role would have translated pretty well to Sentry, because Bob Reynolds is the kind of slightly disturbed person that he portrayed as Danny Cho, even like how he was playing Jupe in Nope too. But unfortunately, he had to leave the project because of stuff getting shifted around all over the industry, and I was devastated. Sentry is still going to be in the movie, but it just would have been amazing to see him in a role like that. He said he still wants to be in the MCU in the future, so we'll just see what that leads to. Phase 6 will potentially be the biggest train wreck ever, or the path that leads to the new golden age of the MCU. You've got Blade featuring Mahershala Ali, which is another project I honestly forgot about because it's been in purgatory for like almost 6 years now. I feel bad for him, I feel bad for the production team, and if I had a nickel for every time a rated mature project from the MCU got completely scrapped and reworked, I would have 2 nickels. It looks like Ryan Coogler is taking the project into his own hands and making some kind of Blade-like project with Michael B. Jordan. I hope the wait will be worth it, and I never could have imagined it would be so hard to make a project about one vampire killing other vampires, but leave that to Marvel. But after Deadpool 3, there is one project that nearly all of my excitement is being poured into, and that is 2025's Fantastic Four. Back in July of last year, I made a video on the Fantastic Four because I genuinely love them, but I also wanted to figure out why it felt like, for some reason over the past decade or so, they've slowly faded from the public eye. Like I said earlier, one of my favorite videos I've done. I learned a lot from it, and you should check it out. Back then, I also talked about the casting rumors at the time, and that whole era was such a sick joke. When I say I was becoming manic, I mean it. Finally, the madness was put to an end once and for all on Valentine's Day. I was here editing my Better Call Saul video, decide to open up Instagram real quick, and all of a sudden I am greeted by one of the most charming pieces of art I've ever laid eyes on in my life. You want to talk about that 4-letter word? That was that 4-letter word right there, man. The MCU's Fantastic Four will consist of Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards, Ebon Moss-Bachrach as Ben Grimm, Joseph Quinn as Johnny Storm, and Vanessa Kirby as Sue Storm. The announcement itself, incredibly anticlimactic. I thought they were going to save it for Comic-Con, maybe D23. They were just like, nah, take it. And honestly, I get it. It's gone on way long enough. The reception to the casting, incredibly mixed, but for the most part, it consisted of this. Ben and Sue, amazing. Reed and Johnny, dear God help us. Me, myself, I don't know. I'm the most familiar with Pedro and Eben. Side note, I finally got to watching The Bear recently. I absolutely love the show and love Eben Moss Backrack in it so much. And he was already in the MCU, which I kind of forgot. I never watched Punisher, please don't hate me. Back to The Bear, Forks is my favorite episode in the series, and it's a Richie focused episode, which is who Eben plays on the show. Phenomenal. I love the story arc of it. Made me fall in love with a Taylor Swift song, and I don't listen to Taylor Swift. But anyway, his role as Richie immediately made me go, yeah, that's Ben. And he's Jewish, so thank you Marvel for paying attention to an integral aspect of Ben. W casting in my opinion. Then with Pedro Pascal, he has become one of the biggest stars of the film and TV industry. I know him best from The Mandalorian, which has become kinda questionable in terms of quality, and The Last of Us, which I thought he was great in. I also just remembered he was in Wonder Woman 1984, and while that movie was quite the experience, not a good one, he made it a little better. Him being cast as Reed completely came out of left field, and it intrigues me a lot. For me, it was like if my boy Nando V Movies didn't think of you when casting these four, I didn't think of you myself. With those roles I mentioned before, I never would have thought he would be Reed Richards. For example, I didn't think Adam Driver would have been the worst option, but seeing Pedro do something like this is very cool to me. I think he'll be able to take this role and make it into something of his own while also honoring Reed as a character too. Mandalorian movie and the Fantastic Four, he is getting paid all the Disney money imaginable. Now Joseph Quinn, I know absolutely nothing about the man aside from him being the Stranger Things guy. And no, I am not watching Stranger Things. I've tried 3 times, just can't get into it. And I feel terrible for him. He has gotten the most flack because of his looks, I guess. Twitter violated this man like Dream did a second face reveal.
Oh, I'm dropping it.
I feel like Johnny is pretty Eddie Munson adjacent personality wise, and people loved him for the role, so I feel like he's good in that department. I feel like I could also believe that he and Vanessa Kirby are siblings. There's a part of me that feels like he'll surprise a lot of people, and I'm honestly rooting for him. Finally, Vanessa Kirby, also not as familiar with her work. It leaked that she would be Sue a long time ago, so I kind of accepted that as fact since last summer, and I like her. There's been past interviews where she had to play coy about whether or not she was really casted, but she always seemed very happy whenever she and Sue Storm were mentioned in the same breath. And with the rumors that Sue is the lead, I'm excited to see her take on the role. Going back to that art, the 60s vibe is in full effect. Now, last year, we thought that the team was just going to be stuck in the 60s and eventually find their way to the present day, but what it seems that Marvel is going for is that this team is from a different universe altogether. Now, I was extremely opposed to this, but I think I like it. For a supposed multiverse saga, we've had maybe like 3 films that deal with universes that aren't the main MCU, and this would be the 4th one, and I like that idea. The biggest question I had coming out of my video last summer was, how is the MCU Fantastic Four going to differentiate itself from everything that we've gotten before? Obviously, bigger studio, more money, but I just mean narratively. And I think this is the best way to do that. A little while ago, we got some art with Johnny, and you could see a New York skyline underneath him, which is pretty retro futuristic, and it's nothing like the New York that we know. To further cement this, Julia Garner was cast as Shalabal, however it's pronounced, aka the Silver Surfer for this film, a female Silver Surfer. While the crowd that utterly despised the Marvels and women in general got their pitchforks and torches ready after this news came out, I started to think, why is this the Silver Surfer that we're getting? And then it hit me, alternate universe. Instead of Norrin Radd being the one to sacrifice himself and become Galactus's herald, Shalabal is instead, and I think that's cool. And it also made me think back to a rumor that I mentioned in that previous video about Mila Kunis being approached to be a female thing, which makes even more sense now too. They want to show us that although there may be some similarities to the MCU, this universe is pretty different. There's probably going to be a Norrin Radd of some sort in the film, and with the way the film is going to end, they're probably going to find their way to the MCU somehow. Galactus is the villain. Last I heard, Javier Bardem was approached for the role. I think that would be amazing, so hopefully he accepts. If not, that's okay too. I just want this movie to be good. I will be seated, and I honestly can't wait any longer. Another project that we've heard whispers of in the wind is Spider-Man 4. Not Tobey Maguire's, but Tom Holland's. No Way Home was the biggest movie post-Endgame, I would say, and a lot of people want to know where Tom Spider-Man is going to go next, especially with how that movie ended. But I'll be the one to say this, Sony executives, you will be dealt with. I want to do a video dedicated to Tom Holland Spider-Man and his whole journey in the MCU, but I have such a beef with Sony because of how they are single-handedly bastardizing some considerable parts of Spider-Man's mythos with their whole universe and seemingly wanting to bleed it over into the MCU. One of the biggest rumors we've had is that Sony want to have another Tobey and Andrew multiversal adventure, while Kevin Feige and Marvel just want to do a grounded story. You have to be dense to look at No Way Home and say, yeah, let's run it back again. No real fans want that. We just want to see Peter truly on his own and no Stark money to back him up, just him getting it out the mud himself. A Daredevil team up will open up a whole different bag. This is Spider-Man we're talking about. The multiversal money glitch is not what you think it is anymore. Learning that an MCU character was a requirement for each of the solo Spider-Man films was really interesting, and after seeing Tom Rothman speak on it, it made more sense to me.
It's reciprocal. So we lend one and they lend one, and that's how Benedict is in this movie. And so we have one more lend back, right? That's committed. But the thing that I can say, and this is actually the accurate scoop on this, which is that the two companies have a terrific working relationship, right?
I'll be back to talk about Tom more in the future. Tom Holland is said to have had more creative involvement with this one so far, and I believe he knows what the fans want, so I trust him. And of course, everything in this phase leads up to Avengers 5 and 6, with Avengers 5 formerly being known as Kang Dynasty. Jonathan Majors, that was the craziest fumble I've seen, brother. Ant-Man followed by Creed 3. You were the chosen one. Not gonna go into all the legalities and details of his situation because it was crazy to witness, but breaking up that fight outside of an In-N-Out combined with his chimney sweeper fit and the ABC interview he did all felt like some stuff out of The Boys. But I bring this up to say his downfall combined with the lackluster performance of Quantumania led to Marvel feeling like they needed to ditch Kang altogether. So Avengers 5 is up in the air as I'm currently making this. Some say there's going to be a full-on pivot away from Kang. Others think there's going to be a recast. I just feel whatever about it at this point. If they do it, cool. If they don't, also cool. Finally, Secret Wars. It feels like I kinda have to force myself to be excited for it. I think Marvel got a little too excited announcing this one as early as they did, and it's weird to think that we were originally supposed to be having this movie in about 1 or 2 years from now. With Kang potentially being axed, people are screaming for Doctor Doom to come in, and I don't know if I've made this clear, but I am terrified of what MCU Doom can potentially look like. As of now, we aren't even too sure if he's going to be in Fantastic Four. I remember when he was supposed to be in Wakanda Forever, which would have been wild and kind of cool to see him build up behind the scenes, but I don't think we should jump to an all-powerful universe-altering Doom just yet. We still have a ton of movies to see how exactly the MCU's Secret Wars really ends up, but I just want it to be good. I want it to slightly reboot the universe so we get the X-Men, and maybe even recast for characters that died. Iron Man and Captain America. Kind of crazy to have a universe without the two of them in it, or at least one if you want to kill one that badly. I really just want to be proven wrong and see the MCU rise and be at its best once again. Phase 4 was rough, and Phase 5 has almost been as bad. We've got tons of projects allegedly in development, and some that may get axed altogether. They also plan on adapting a new Marvel model where they will pretty much only put effort into guaranteed successes, which is a really bad idea in my opinion. Playing it safe isn't what brought us a project like Doctor Strange or Thor Ragnarok in 2017. Projects like The Marvels or Echo weren't bad because they were led by women, and I'm getting the sense that corporate is really thinking that's the issue. It's not. We just need captivating stories again, which seems pretty simple if we're being real, but when that money flow picks up for some very odd reason, it gets harder to stick with what works. And although that doesn't mean you should only do what works, talking to you in specific, Mr. Iger, there are some foundational things across past projects that made them the successes that they were. I have a feeling Deadpool and Wolverine is that glimmer of hope on the horizon, but it's keeping up the steam in the long run that really matters, and not flip-flopping from good projects to bad, which this phase has managed to do consistently. Before I go, I do have a confession to make. I am one of those insiders I was ragging on before, and Kevin Feige, I've got some info for you specifically. You see, I heard James Gunn has been talking bad on your name, brother. Streets are saying that the DCU is coming to take the throne. I know he thinks the same thing too. They're saying you don't have it anymore. All the sauce that the MCU had is gone. So Mr. Feige, I got a challenge for you. Prove them wrong.
Listen to everybody. Nobody believes in you. What are you prepared to do about it?
Show them you still got it, Kevin. And if you really want to show them, slide your boy some tickets to that Fantastic Four premiere. I'm just saying. Nah, but in all seriousness, the MCU just needs to lock in, and I know it can. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, like and subscribe because it would be cool, and I am on the road to 10K. As always, take care of yourselves and have a good one.
You be in Miami with your family, those your brothers, ayy. When we split apart, there's the love between our mothers, ayy. No, we ain't together, but whatever, I still fuck with you. Used to get the numbers, selling flights to get them dirty.